In the mythology of Dungeons and Dragons, few creatures command more terror than the chromatic dragons. 5 species, 5 elements, 5 embodiments of destruction that have terrorized the multiverse since the earliest days of creation. The red dragon, wreathed in flame and pride. The blue dragon, crackling with lightning and patience. The green dragon, breathing poison and lies. The black dragon, dripping acid and cruelty. The white dragon, exhaling cold and primal fury. Each represents something different. Each kills in its own way, and all serve, willingly or not, the 5-headed goddess who claims to have created them. This is the complete chronicle of the chromatic dragons, their biology, their behavior, their societies, their secrets, and the truths that most adventurers never learn before it is too late. The chronicle begins not with the dragons themselves, but with their queen. Before the separation of worlds, before the establishment of the planes, before mortals drew breath, there existed a being of unfathomable power. Different mythologies assign different names to this entity. Some call it Io, others call it Asgarath. The Draconic creation texts describe a god of gods, a dragon before dragons, whose body contained the potential for all dragonkind. The mythology varies by telling, but the common elements persist. Io was whole, and then Io was divided. Some texts describe a great battle against a primordial force. Others describe a deliberate sundering, a choice to create from unity a diversity of form and purpose. The result was the same. From the remains of Io emerged 2 deities of opposing nature, Bahamut, the platinum dragon, representing justice and nobility, and Tiamat, the 5-headed queen of chromatic dragons, representing greed and destruction. Tiamat possesses 5 heads, 1 for each color of chromatic dragon. The red head breathes fire and demands dominion. The blue head breathes lightning and calculates with cold precision. The green head breathes poison and whispers lies. The black head breathes acid and revels in cruelty. The white head breathes cold and strikes with primal fury. Each head has its own personality. Each head has its own agenda. All are unified in their hatred of Bahamut and their desire to dominate all of existence. Tiamat currently resides in Avernus, the first layer of the 9 hells. Whether she is imprisoned there or merely biding her time depends on which scholars one consults. Her influence extends throughout the multiverse regardless. Cults worship her in secret. Chromatic dragons serve her purposes, whether they acknowledge her or not. Her shadow falls across every story involving her draconic children. The eternal conflict between Tiamat and Bahamut shapes dragon society throughout existence. This is not mere rivalry. This is cosmic war, fought through proxies and champions, through chromatic and metallic dragons meeting in battle across countless worlds, through the choices of every dragon that has ever lived. Bahamut represents justice and nobility, protection and wisdom. Tiamat represents tyranny and greed, destruction and domination. Neither can defeat the other permanently. Neither will stop trying. Understanding this cosmic context illuminates everything that follows. Chromatic dragons are not merely large, dangerous reptiles. They are soldiers in an eternal conflict, bearers of divine malevolence, creatures whose evil is not learned but inherited. They are the children of Tiamat, and they are very, very dangerous. The hierarchy of chromatic dragon power is well established across all editions of Dungeons and Dragons. The red dragon stands at the apex, the largest and most powerful of the 5 species. Below red sits blue, cunning and patient. Green occupies the middle position, relying on manipulation rather than raw strength. Black follows, cruel but physically lesser, and white sits at the bottom, smallest and least intelligent, though no less deadly in its own domain. This hierarchy shapes chromatic dragon society. A red dragon considers itself superior to all other dragons and will demand submission or flee from any challenge to that supremacy. A white dragon, by contrast, is often allowed to leave red dragon territory unmolested, not out of mercy, but because the red dragon considers the white unworthy of the effort required to kill it. Dragons age differently than mortal creatures. Their lifespans are measured not in decades, but in centuries, and their power grows continuously throughout their existence. A dragon passes through several distinct life stages. The wormling stage covers the first 5 years of life, a period of extreme vulnerability when the young dragon must learn to survive in a hostile world. Young dragons range from approximately 5 to 100 years old, growing stronger but still lacking the full power and wisdom of maturity. Adult dragons span from 100 to roughly 800 years, fully capable of defending their territory and building their hordes. Ancient dragons have lived for 800 years or more, their power grown to legendary proportion. And beyond ancient lies the category of great worm, dragons so old and powerful that they have transcended normal draconic limitations entirely. Each stage brings increased size, increased magical power, and increased cunning. An ancient dragon is not merely an older version of a young dragon. It is a fundamentally different creature, shaped by centuries of experience, scheming, and accumulated power. The chromatic dragons that adventurers typically encounter are young or adult specimens. Ancient dragons are rare enough to be legendary. Great worms are the stuff of apocalyptic prophecy. This context established, the exploration of individual species can begin. Number Part 2. The Red Dragon, Tyrant of Flame. The story begins with fire. When legends, fairy tales, and fables speak of dragons without specifying a color, when they tell of kingdoms laid waste, virtuous maidens sacrificed, and valiant heroes sent home as charred corpses, odds are that they speak of the mighty red dragon, also called flame dragons, fireworms, and mountain dragons. These horrific beasts epitomize the iconic dragon traits. All dragons are predators, but reds are the most voracious, consuming far more than they require. All dragons are greedy, but reds are avaricious beyond any point of reason, for they fully believe that all wealth belongs to those strong enough to take it, and no amount of wealth is ever enough. The red dragon is the strongest chromatic dragon, and it very well knows it. In fact, it flaunts it. Its kind grows bigger than any other, save for the gold dragon. Red dragons and gold dragons share the ceiling for their respective branches. The red dragon stands as the strongest of the chromatic dragons. The gold dragon stands as the strongest of the metallic dragons. This parallel is not coincidental. It is cosmic design. Red dragons live in high mountains, volcanoes, and deep abandoned strongholds. The more geothermal activity, the better. They are creatures of heat and fire, drawn to the warmth of the Earth's molten core. The discussion now turns to physical appearance and identification. When examining a red dragon, there is no mistaking the species. Other metallic dragons might present some difficulty in identification, especially in poor lighting conditions. A bronze dragon might be confused with a copper dragon. A silver dragon might resemble a white dragon from a distance. These confusions happen. But when it comes to chromatic dragons, telling them apart is actually fairly easy, as most of them have very discerning features. However, in the darkness of a dungeon, where color cannot be discerned, where even dark vision renders the world in shades of gray, several features would confirm that the creature observed is indeed a red dragon. The first identifying feature is the two massive horns that sweep backward from the skull. This is a feature that every single red dragon possesses. The horns can vary in color, they might have different styles. To a casual observer unfamiliar with draconic anatomy, a red dragon might even be confused with a copper dragon in this regard. But red dragon horns are typically very, very long, at least far longer than those of copper dragons. These types of dragons do have other differences worth knowing. The differences might save your life. The wings are different between species. The smells are different as well. Copper dragons have a stony smell to them, very earthy. Red dragons smell of sulfur and pumice, which is a sort of volcanic rock. This might sound too specific to be useful, but keep in mind that any druid worth their salt would be able to tell that smelly difference, as would most scouting familiars. A good ranger should also be able to tell them apart without problem. A significant detail that the Monster Manual does not fully explain is that all red dragons have a constant small stream of fire that jets from their nostrils, especially when angry. This is not something the dragon can fully control. It simply happens to them. And keep in mind that red dragons are always angry, so this fire is probably always visible. When looking at a red dragon, most of the time there is also a hot air mirage visible in front of it. The very presence of the dragon burns the air around it. Heat distortion ripples the view, making the creature appear to shimmer and dance, even when standing perfectly still. Using these features, an observer should be able to distinguish this kind of dragon from copper dragons and from all other chromatic species. One additional behavioral marker proves useful for identification. Red dragons jump and attack everything. There is typically no dialogue when meeting one. It will simply pounce. That too is a good tell. The exploration now turns to what the Monster Manual reveals about red dragons, and more importantly, what it does not reveal. The Monster Manual states that red dragons are the most covetous out of all of the true dragons, and that they tirelessly seek to increase their treasure hoards. The text indicates their preference for mountainous terrains, specifically any terrain where they can perch high and survey their domain. The entry notes that red dragons fight frequently with copper dragons, who also prefer mountains as their lairs. It describes how, when angered, red dragons go into destructive rages, and that they are very impulsive creatures who are very easy to anger. Red dragons see themselves as kings and view the rest of dragonkind as inferior. Even though they are fiercely territorial and isolationist, they seek to know about the events of the world and make use of lesser creatures to facilitate this knowledge. This detail is crucial. For the most part, red dragons want to know about other red dragons with which they compete for status. When a dragon requires servants, it demands fealty from evil humanoids. If those humanoids refuse, the dragon destroys and threatens until they comply. The Monster Manual also notes that red dragon hordes are legendary, for they care for nothing else. Anything that has a monetary value, they want. They have the legendary ability to know exactly how much something is worth by just looking at it. A dragon also knows the exact value of every item in its hoard, along with the item's exact location. So if something goes missing, the dragon knows immediately. And if it knows who took it, it will go to any lengths necessary to exterminate the individual, or go on a mindless rage, destroying anything nearby. The entry also mentions, almost as an aside, that a red dragon likes to spend as much time outside of its lair as it does inside. This detail proves significant for understanding red dragon behavior patterns. All of this information from the Monster Manual is actually quite good. The entry for red dragons is one of the more complete entries for any chromatic species. But now the discussion turns to what the Monster Manual does not tell. The lair requirements of red dragons deserve extended examination. Red dragons love mountains and volcanoes. This is not just established in the lore, it is almost common sense. Everyone knows that red dragons love to lair in volcanoes. The Monster Manual specifies that dragons love to find places where they can perch, but it does not elaborate on just how important this perching requirement actually is. What is interesting about the red dragon is that, much like the gold dragon, the actual location of its lair is not particularly important, as long as it has its one requisite feature. For the gold dragon, the requisite is that the location must be a major source of magic. For red dragons, the requisite is that it must have a location high up where the dragon can survey its territory. That is truly it. The dragon would actually much rather be on a cold peak with snow blanketing its territory, or on a high mountain surrounded by dunes or desert, or in a high crag surrounded by forest, or on flatlands overlooking a massive valley rather than a volcano with no view. It does not really matter what the territory is, as long as the dragon can perch high and see it all. The red dragon actually hates the cold. It just does not like it. But it would deal with the cold if that meant having a really high perch. In fact, the most popular places for red dragons to dwell in the Sword Coast are the mountains to the north, especially those at the spine of the world. Even though it is completely frozen all year round and unbelievably cold, those just happen to be the tallest mountains in the region, and that is literally the only thing that these red dragons actually care about. Because of this preference for height over temperature, red dragons are very rarely found in the crags south of the Sword Coast. Southern mountains are shorter. The view is less commanding. Red dragons simply do not want them. The question now becomes, what do red dragons do in these lairs? The monster manual does not explain this clearly. Outside of causing mayhem, red dragons spend the vast majority of their time developing tactics. These dragons love to have a strategy for every possible outcome. What if my lair is attacked by a group of 5 mages who teleport right in my face? The dragon should have a plan for that. What if my 3 dragon neighbors band together in order to take me down? The dragon should probably build a strategy for that. What if adventurers attack while I sleep? The dragon has 3 plans and will randomly select one when the situation arises. Typically, when a situation arises, a red dragon has about 2 to 3 strategies that have been specifically designed for this eventuality. When triggered, the dragon will simply randomly pick one of the options and go with it. The red dragon does not like to think much while in actual combat. It is mostly a very instinctual creature once violence begins, so it creates the scenarios beforehand so that it can then follow them blindly when the situation arises. A beholder creates 1,000 possible strategies for every outcome, but the beholder is neurotic and crazy. It is mad. The red dragon is typically smart and calculated, and more than anything, it has time on its hands. Lots of time. The monster manual does not mention this, but red dragons hibernate for very long periods of time, though a more apt term would be periods of downtime. When a red dragon feels like it has accomplished what it needed to do, it will move into its lair and sleep, generally for about 10 years before finally waking up. This is not quite as long as green dragons, who hibernate for up to 30 years at a time. In fact, it is stated that constantly green dragons wake up from their sleep to find that their forest has been taken by a community who have built their houses around the dragon's lair, infuriating the green dragon. Green dragons are the only dragons who hibernate longer than red dragons. 10 years is the typical maximum for red dragon dormancy. This makes sense given their differing approaches to power. Green dragons use their subtlety and bribes to manipulate humanoids, so pulling the strings and then sleeping for 30 years fits their methodology. Red dragons use terror and murder to further their goals, so a little more activity is actually required for them. The monster manual does not reveal that red dragons actually prefer to fight on the ground rather than in the air. This seems counterintuitive. Dragons are famous for flight. One would expect flying creatures to prefer aerial combat. Red dragons are far too massive to employ delicate, agile air movements. Plus, their biggest asset truly is their physical might. Very similar to copper dragons in this regard, red dragons are extremely fast and agile when they are on the ground. They leap around very fast. They move and weave in combat. They are not as adept or as awesome to watch on the ground as copper dragons, but they would certainly defeat a copper dragon in an even battle every single time. But rarely will these creatures actually fight a red dragon one-on-one. In fact, this is the single most infuriating aspect of combat for red dragons, especially when it comes to silver dragons. Red dragons hate silver dragons because they are constantly fighting against them, and silver dragons always win. The reason silver dragons always win is that silver dragons employ the help of adventurers or other magical creatures in order to fight the dragon. This, combined with the fact that the cold breath of the silver dragon slows the movements of the red dragon, which in turn makes the red dragon appear weak and sluggish when in combat, which in turn lowers the reputation of the red dragon among other red dragons. Reputation is literally everything to a red dragon. This fact requires its own extended examination. The section now addresses the relationship between red dragons and gold dragons. When it comes to gold dragons, things get a bit muddy, because gold dragons are actually equal, if not stronger, than red dragons. This creates a paradox in the dragon's mind. If red dragons are the best of dragon kind, how can gold dragons defeat them? A revealing quote from Draconic scholarship explains how they deal with this paradox. Reds feel great rivalry with silver and copper dragons, but they save their most vociferous hatred for golds. The word vociferous is appropriate, because while reds will loudly proclaim their eagerness to immediately dispatch any gold that they encounter, they often find some important reason why they shouldn't engage a gold in combat. The reason for this is that although they are overbearingly arrogant, reds are not stupid. They know, deep down, that golds are more powerful than they are, even though they will not admit it. So they are less eager to start a battle that they could very well lose. Red dragons talk loudly about how much they hate gold dragons while quietly arranging never to actually fight them. When it comes to fighting humanoids, however, observers would not immediately realize that the red dragon is actually very careful when it comes to using its fire breath. If the dragon can get away with not using its breath weapon, then it will not. The reason is greed. Red dragons are so greedy that they would actually rather just take some extra time in order to defeat opponents through physical combat, just so that they do not burn away any valuables that those opponents might actually be carrying. As the dragon is fighting, it is actually thinking of all of the delicious loot that its opponents have, and it is very careful not to destroy it all with its breath weapon. Wealth means so much to a red dragon because a dragon defines its status amongst other red dragons all based on wealth. Red dragons do not actually care about any other type of dragon, especially other chromatic dragons. All they care about is what their standing is among red dragons, who of course they consider to be the epitome of dragon kind. This is the main reason why red dragons love to have slaves. They use those slaves to gather information for them about the world, but the biggest topic they are interested in is finding out what other red dragons are doing. If the messenger brings information that another red dragon has a bigger horde, then it is chaos. This is when the dragon truly goes wild. The monster manual says that the dragon goes wild when a person steals from its horde. It says that the dragon goes and burns literally everything around its lair, including all of the villages and towns around. This description is somewhat misleading. This sentence actually comes from an older text that clarifies that the dragon only destroys the towns and cities that housed and fed the person that robbed them. So it is not quite a mad rage as much as it is a controlled rage. The dragon knows who it is angry towards, and unleashes that anger in that direction. This controlled rage, however, goes completely out the window when the dragon discovers that it has lost face by having a neighboring dragon with a bigger horde. Sometimes it is not even just a bigger horde, but knowing that a neighboring dragon has done something epic that increases his reputation, which in turn lowers the reputation of other dragons in the area. This is when the red dragon really goes wild. This is when the dragon goes out there and burns the entire countryside, killing and massacring as many people as it can. This is where the legends of the ferociousness of red dragons truly come from. What the rampaging dragon does is always make sure to leave some people alive, so that those people will run and spread the news of the dragon's might and ferocity. Because, after all, what the dragon is really after is recognition of its might and power. It wants to have all the reputation as being the best red dragon in the area. Sages are sure that red dragons do not work together. It is not in their mindset to ever cooperate with anyone. However, people who have had direct experiences with red dragons will surely tell you otherwise. Going back to the Sword Coast as an example, the people of the Silver Marches would tell you that they have had massive, constant issues with red dragons cooperating and attacking simultaneously. The reality of what is actually happening is that one dragon will commit some epic act of evil by killing a bunch of people. A neighboring red dragon will hear of it and will go on a rage to try and one-up it. Then all the other neighbors will hear of it as well, who will also try and one-up it. This creates a massive wave of destruction, where all red dragons are vying to become the most ferocious red dragon in the area. It looks like cooperation. It is actually competition. It is known by adventurers that this is actually the moment to hunt a red dragon. When one is in such a rage, the dragon abandons all its contingencies. As discussed earlier, red dragons have contingencies for every single eventuality, but those strategies go out of the window when a dragon is in one of these status-driven rages. It is very explicitly written that when a dragon is rampaging through the fields in such a manner, it leaves itself vulnerable in many different ways, as it is not clearly thinking. So this would be the time to hunt one, if the opportunity ever arises. Another use red dragons have for information seeking about other red dragons is to find out if a neighboring red dragon is weak or wounded. When such news is heard, the red dragon will actually attempt to kill the weak dragon in order to steal its lair and hoard. The one philosophy that red dragons keep close to their heart is the notion that if something cannot be defended, then it does not deserve to be kept. This is a philosophy that they hold for every other creature, and this is something that red dragons have that completely differs from most other dragons. A blue dragon typically hates metallic dragons, but one would seldom see a blue dragon actively seek to kill a white or black dragon unless they are truly messing with each other's territories. Chromatic dragons deal with each other typically amicably, at least as much as they can, instead of trying to kill each other. The same applies with metallic dragons. One would never see a copper dragon actively seek to try and kill a brass dragon or really any other metallic dragon. Red dragons, though, will actively try to kill any other type of dragon that they meet. They hate everybody. In fact, the Monster Manual does not mention that even the religious beliefs of the red dragons confirms their notion of superiority amongst any other type of dragon. Red dragons believe that the creator of the world was a humongous red dragon named Askarath, and that all red dragons are his direct descendants. They believe that other chromatic dragons lost their purity by losing their original color, and that this makes them unworthy to carry the torch as the pinnacle of dragonkind. This might not necessarily be the actual truth, but that is irrelevant. This is what red dragons choose to believe. They truly see other chromatics as simply impure. Although, for sure, their hatred for other red dragons climaxes any hatred they may have towards other chromatic dragons. They hate everybody. They just hate each other more. This is why mating is very tricky, since of course the interaction involves two red dragons that are forced to deal with each other. The only reason that red dragon mating even works is because having a red dragon come to you to request your seed actually increases your reputation among other red dragons in the area. That request shows that you are more desirable than all of the other red dragon neighbors. 99% of the time, what happens is a younger but very highly respected female will come to present herself to an older male. Because of the massive reputation boost, the male will almost always consent. Once the female is impregnated, the male will leave, leaving her to deal with the babies alone. The mother will protect the eggs until they hatch, but not with her life. A red dragon will always save herself rather than sacrifice herself for the eggs. Once the wormlings are born, it will not take long before the mother will leave them to fend for themselves. Red dragons are not very good parents at all. The parents will typically only teach them the very basics before leaving them to survive out there in the wilds by themselves. Now, these baby red wormlings will have a tremendously difficult time because they will actually share the same emotional baggage of their parents. They will refuse to seek any help from any elder dragon. Typically, A baby wormling or a young dragon will seek advice from other dragons, and other dragons will almost always help. This even applies for baby chromatic dragons. A young black dragon might seek help from an elder blue dragon, and the blue dragon will advise the baby. In fact, many female dragons, especially those who cannot have children anymore, will spend a large number of years just advising young dragons on how to survive out there in the wilds. This is very typical. A young red dragon will not seek this type of help, as that would imply that the young dragon needs something from someone else, and its pride will simply not have that. This makes growing up as a red dragon extremely challenging. On top of that, the bright red scaly hide of the dragon makes it pop on the mountainous background, which attracts a lot of predators, including humanoids, who would want to kill the young dragon for its scales. This is on top of the fact that no town or city wants red dragons growing in their area, for obvious reasons. So actively hunting young red dragons is actually quite common. Because of this, young red dragons will spend decades hiding in their caves until they grow old enough to be able to defend themselves. Their pride torments them during these years of concealment. They know they should be dominant, but they are not yet powerful enough to enforce that dominance. The frustration builds. When they finally emerge, they are angry, and they remember everything, every slight, every threat, every moment of fear. Red dragons live for centuries. They have time to take revenge on everyone who wronged them during their vulnerable years. One point worth noting: rarely will anyone actually see red dragons fight over a mate, since red dragons are very well aware of the lengths that a red dragon will go when offended. They seldom try to take a chance fighting a dragon that has been deemed as worthy by a female. Any of these confrontations will result in the death of one of the dragons, so they prudently quit the field when a superior rival makes a claim or is claimed by a female. Red dragons are actually quite smart when it comes to choosing who they will fight. They will never pick a fight that they know they will lose, even if they are stubborn about their own power. If an adventuring party is unknown to the dragon and they find a red dragon, it will fight them without hesitation 100% of the time. It will not even talk. It will just pounce. Period. Once the battle has started, there will be no backing away. Backing away will lose them face with other red dragons. It will just fight to the death because of that. But red dragons do not lose face if they back away before the battle starts. They will do so if they recognize the adventuring party and they know that it is a battle they would have a hard time winning. The discussion now turns to one of the most fascinating pieces of red dragon lore that the monster manual does not tell. The legends of red dragons asking for the sacrifice of young maidens is actually true. Red dragons are fresh meat eaters. They have the ability to eat plants, but they would rather starve to death than try a vegan meal. What is interesting is that according to them, the younger the meat, the tastier it is. A red dragon will enjoy the meat of a teenager or young adult much more than that of an adult. This also applies for all animals. A red dragon would much rather prefer to eat a young dragon's meat than an adult dragon's meat. Now it gets even more specific. According to red dragons, their favorite meats are those of humans and elves. Of course, the younger the better. But particularly, they claim that for whatever reason, females taste better than males. Hence, the best meat that any red dragon can have would be young females. This is why, in Dungeons and Dragons, red dragons will go out of their way to ask for the sacrifice of maidens in exchange for the salvation of the town. This goes along with the mentality of dragons to want to terrorize and threaten humanoids that live close to their lair. Sometimes the dragon will even use its charm spell abilities to convince humanoids to go along with the sacrificing rituals. The practice of maiden sacrifice in dragon-adjacent cultures is, at its root, a catering preference. The actual meat of the red dragon is also very much edible, should anyone acquire it. It is, however, extraordinarily spicy, to the point where, if ingested without the proper preparation, it will produce horrible cramps and extreme pain if ingested. The meat has to be aged and exposed to the open air for some time before it can be properly eaten. Most who face red dragons never have opportunity to consider such culinary questions. Number Part 3. The Blue Dragon, Master of the Storm. The exploration now moves from fire to lightning, from mountains to deserts, from rage to patience. Black dragons are terrible, dangerously evil creatures, honestly the worst of the worst. They kill just for the sake of it, and torturing their meals is but a hobby to them. Blue dragons, on the other hand, are completely opposite, while still remaining on the evil spectrum. The surprises about blue dragon society deserve careful examination. Color is probably the easiest way to recognize a chromatic dragon. The problem is that there are tons of creatures out there who might pretend to be a dragon when they are not. A wizard pretending to be a blue dragon would most certainly nail the color, but that wizard could be caught on a myriad of other things that truly make a blue dragon a blue dragon. Things that a wizard who has not actually studied dragons would not know. A dragon scholar's knowledge will also not help recognize the species if what is being observed is a skeleton or if it is a dracolich. Knowing which breath weapon to expect can literally save your life. The biggest feature of a blue dragon is the big horn in the middle of its forehead. The biggest misconception, though, is that it is a single, long horn. This is where observers can nail imposters who do not really know about blue dragons. A blue dragon's horn will always have a second tip behind the first. This is not merely an artistic depiction or a quirky feature of a specific dragon. This is how all blue dragon horns look. If a dragon were to not have the second hidden tip in the back, then that might actually be considered a birth defect. This is one of the few examples where the direction of D and D actually shifted during the editions. Looking back at the first and second edition, the blue dragon was not quite the same as it looks now. In fact, much of the design for the blue dragon shifted dramatically starting in 3rd edition. Since 3rd edition, all blue dragons have flat tails like a crocodile does. This is something that would not be seen in the earlier editions. Also, the ears are always particularly frizzled in the contemporary design, whereas in the earlier editions they would be shown looking like elf ears, which is of course not the case anymore. None of these things would be visible on a skeleton, except for the horn. If someone saw a draconic skeleton with its horn, they would be able to easily tell that it was indeed a blue dragon. But what if the horn was taken by an adventurer, or a hag, or a rival dragon? Dragon horns can be very valuable. Then the only tell remaining would be its nostrils. Indeed, blue dragon nostrils are particularly discernible from all other dragons, especially on a skeleton. They are enormous and uncomfortably close to the eye sockets. This would be a guaranteed tell that this was a blue dragon. Though, to be honest, the big hole where the horn was supposed to be should also be a pretty solid tell. The chin spikes are also always a good indicator when examining a blue dragon. Those spikes are very dangerous, so handle them with caution. Now that the physical appearance is established, the discussion turns to the type of dragon. What are they like personally? Where do they live? These questions are actually very much related, because a lot of how the dragon acts and behaves is completely predicated on the biome it resides in. A black dragon does not like to fly. The reason is that a black dragon is safe in the swamp. Flying takes it out of that ecosystem. Swamps are also typically not that big, and a flying black dragon would quickly find itself out of its own home. This is a similar problem that a green dragon might suffer. If a green dragon were to fly in a single direction for 20 minutes, then it would find itself actually far from the forest it finds so comfortable. Red dragons face similar constraints. A red dragon flying in a single direction for extended periods would find itself far from the volcanic or mountainous terrain where it is most powerful. The biome dictates a lot of the actions of the dragon that resides within. Swamps are typically not that big but are extremely dense. The same applies with forests. A large green dragon can claim a forest as its domain, but much of its power is concentrated on the ground floor. It can manipulate the plants and animals. It probably has slaves, but none of these things are useful to the green dragon if the green dragon is miles up into the air. If a different dragon were to attack the green dragon would want to be walking down in the thick of the forest where it can actually use all of its powers. Blue dragons present a completely different situation. Blue dragons reside in deserts and arid badlands. The innate difference between the desert biome and the swamp or forest is that deserts are huge, and most of them are just empty. A large green dragon might be content with a few miles of forest. A blue dragon would certainly not be content with merely a few miles of desert. Forests have all kinds of food and secrets and vaults and dungeons. Deserts barely have any of those things. There are fewer deserts than there are swamps or forests, but those deserts that do exist are huge, and not really much lives in them. This makes it so that a single blue dragon can actually control an insanely big chunk of desert land, and call it its lair. The discussion now examines how the desert biome changes the personality of the blue dragon. Unlike the swamp and the forests, which are unfriendly to flying, deserts are actually very friendly to flying. Blue dragons are probably the best flyers in the entire dragon kind. That is because all they do is fly. So much so, in fact, that they can actually maintain their flight for days at a time, even while in combat. This is why adventurers always say that fighting a blue dragon is the most boring out of all of the creatures to hunt. Finding a blue dragon might not be too hard, but that dragon will literally just soar in the sky for days, shooting lightning bolts at you until you die. If it does get close to the ground, then it will simply dig itself into the ground and rest far away from your spells or blades. This does not even mention the fact that the entire ground beneath you is probably trapped with specially made sinkholes. And this does not even mention the fact that blue dragons are masters of the illusory terrain spell. Nothing that you actually see on the desert could be real. The point is that fighting a blue dragon is annoying, and it will probably be a multiple-day affair. Dragons are legendary creatures of magic, and they all have an incredible talent. Most do, at least. The legendary talent of the blue dragon is its patience. It will siege you for a week or more, if that is what it takes. It literally does not care. It will simply wait until its targets die of exhaustion, dehydration, or accumulated lightning damage. The one caveat about blue dragons in this regard is that they will never back down. They do not run away unless they are on the cusp of death. They consider running away as cowardly. A match against a blue dragon is like a chess game with positioning and tactics and decisions. The blue dragon loves making combat decisions that are brilliant and pose no risk to the dragon. They will typically perform ventriloquism and illusions to separate enemies or drive them towards their traps. What is particularly interesting about blue dragons, and this is actually something that the monster manual does not tell, is that they are actually very social creatures, and they might not be as evil as one might expect. The trick about living in the desert is that, as mentioned before, a single blue dragon can dominate an extremely large area. The problem is that there are not many deserts, so what ends up happening is that multiple blue dragons actually end up congregating on the same deserts. Blue dragons are also lawful creatures and fairly social, so they actually form communities within the desert with a designated leader. The leader, of course, will be the oldest and most powerful blue dragon. This elder dragon will be the suzerain of the desert, like an overlord. All the lesser dragons will pay homage to the suzerain blue dragon. This suzerain will then settle any form of dispute that might happen within its domain. This might actually include territorial battles and even mating disputes. The mating process for blue dragons is quite elaborate, and it typically involves a draconic version of dating. The blue dragons exchange gifts between each other. Sometimes food, sometimes treasures. When the courtship goes well, they present their relationship to the other blue dragons in the area, like a form of celebration or announcement. Then the suzerain blue dragon will hear their announcement and give its blessing. Or not, but if it does, then and only then will the blue dragons mate. Infidelity is very rare within blue dragons. The children that spawn out of a couple will be very well provided for and even loved by their parents. Blue dragons take extreme care of their eggs and will protect them with their lives. They never leave their eggs unattended. Blue dragons also seldom challenge the ruling of their suzerain. If they dislike the elder dragon that rules the desert, then they typically just leave to go find another desert. When actually hearing all of this, it does paint an interesting picture of the society of blue dragons that differs dramatically from what most people would imagine for chromatic dragons in general. This is certainly opposite to black dragons, and none of this is actually in the monster manual, which is remarkable. Part 4. The Green Dragon, Master of Deception. Few dragons are as utterly reviled among humanoids as green dragons, known also as forest dragons. Although green dragons might not be as powerful or as destructive as some of their kin, they are innately and instinctively deceptive. They lie as easily as people speak, and they are very good at it. They love intrigue and prefer to achieve their goals through guile and double dealing over any other means. Any brute can hunt, but it takes skill and intelligence to trick one's prey into offering itself for dinner. Green dragons are cunning and deceitful. They would rather plan and concoct get-rich schemes with as little work as possible. Unlike blue dragons, who are incredibly smart and hard-working, green dragons would most certainly rather pick the longer but easier path. They are very ill-tempered and thoroughly evil. They enslave the intelligent beings that they meet and slay the unintelligent ones who are unfortunate enough to cross their path. Much like black dragons, green dragons love ambushes. But unlike black dragons, green dragons actually have a plan. They use their slaves for specific purposes. They capture adventurers for information and treasure. They ensnare diplomats to ransom them. If you are a slave of the dragon, you must prove your worth every single day, or face death under its jaws. When speaking to intelligent beings, the dragon will sound smooth and honey-tongued, smart and cultured. It will try to make a deal with you, but in reality, the dragon is always scheming and planning. Any deal made with the dragon will surely turn sour, sooner rather than later. The green dragon makes its lair in forests and woods. The magics of the dragon turn the woods magical, forcing the plants to grow thorns and work for the creature. The critters of the forest become the eyes of the dragon. The plants become its tools. Even the ground itself will hide the tracks of the beast. A pervasive mist will choke the forest, painting images of the nightmares of the dragon's slaves. This is the green dragon. This is what the monster manual tells us, and it is in fact probably the best entry for any dragon that has been seen so far. The entry for the green dragon is remarkably complete compared to others. The green dragon receives about 14 paragraphs of description versus a measly 6 for the gold dragon. The green dragon paragraphs are also generally longer. Overall, what the monster manual provides here for the green dragon is some really good information. This actually makes further research harder, since the monster manual already did a pretty good job. But there is still more that most people do not know. The question of how to differentiate a green dragon from another type of dragon becomes important when color cannot be discerned. Remember that color cannot be discerned in the darkness, even with dark vision. The frills on top of the dragon's head, which every single green dragon has, is probably the best identifier, though observers will have to pay close attention to a few other things. Many other dragons, like the black, gold, and copper dragons, share similar looking frills, so the process of elimination becomes necessary. Black dragons have very specific looking horns. That should be a pretty dead giveaway. Gold dragons have inordinately long tails, and their legs are super thin when compared to the thick and big thighs of the green dragon. Copper dragons have short necks when compared to the swan-styled neck of the green dragon. Looking at a draconic skeleton of a green dragon, it is going to be very tricky to tell what exactly it is, especially if the frills are no longer visible on the skeleton. However, there is something magical and very special that happens in and around the body of a dead green dragon. That will be covered shortly. The social behavior of green dragons deserves examination. Green dragons are actually masters of politics. In fact, very often they try to meddle in the political affairs of cities and towns close to their forest. They will attempt to bribe and coerce city officials in order to steer the community in a particular direction. There is seldom a real reason for the dragon to do this, since for the most part the green dragon just enjoys manipulating people in this form. It is a hobby used to personally amuse itself. It actually sees this as an experiment and as practice of its core abilities. Unfortunately for green dragons, they typically do not possess the power to polymorph into a humanoid. Many of them actually would love nothing more than to straight up live in a city and be allowed to coerce people as a shrewd merchant or as a master politician. In the forest, though, they typically take a more direct and threatening approach. The Monster Manual describes interactions between green dragons as harsh and crude. This is most certainly true. Green dragons are lawful creatures. But unlike gold dragons and blue dragons who are always lawful, the green dragons do not actually have strict hierarchies within their communities. This is because green dragons know each other too well to be able to trust one another. They know that they are all liars and traitors. For the most part, they would refuse to cooperate with one another. If there are multiple green dragons that live in the same forest, there will then be a very straightforward pecking order where the older dragon will be treated with more respect. But this level of respect is paper thin. No green dragon is ever fooled into thinking another actually has anything but disdain towards it. That being said, this level of engagement completely shifts between mates. Even though green dragons do not interact very well at all with each other, when one finds a mate, they develop an extremely powerful bond, one that most people might not expect. There is literally nothing more important to a mated green dragon than its babies, who they will defend to the death if they have to. In the event of an attack by an enemy, the female dragon will jump straight into combat in order to protect the babies, while the male green dragon will fly away with the eggs or the wormlings in his clutches. The male will not return until he is sure that the babies are safe. Only then will the male dragon return to join the combat. Green dragon parents will make sure that their babies are always well protected and will spend every single waking moment teaching them everything that they need to know, which, for the most part, revolves around teaching them how to trick and how to manipulate lesser beings. Indeed, schooling for the green wormlings is all about how to sweet-talk others and how to get what they want from them. This love that green dragons have for their babies is the one reason that defines their greatest enemy. The Monster Manual mentions that green dragons enjoy the taste of elves. In fact, they also enjoy the taste of sprites. They also enjoy corrupting and torturing both. But this is not necessarily because elves or sprites are their greatest enemy. A green dragon's greatest enemy is actually hill giants. This is because, in hill giant culture, hunting and eating green dragon babies is considered a delicacy, and since green dragons are overly protective of their babies, this has created an unbreakable hatred for the giants. So, whenever possible, green dragons will do their best to kill and enslave as many hill giants as they can. The hatred is eternal. When it comes to a green dragon's territory and lair, the answer seems obvious. Green dragons equal forest. It is as straightforward as it gets. This is why what comes next might actually blow your mind a little bit, because it is certainly not intuitive. Green dragons love forests, but they actually very much dislike jungles. A green dragon would almost 100% of the time prefer a very cold tundra forest than a steamy hot jungle, but certainly Its favorite style of wood would be the more temperate style of forests. Green dragons extract a lot of enjoyment out of their visual and olfactory surroundings. They love the look of the forest. They enjoy the changing of the seasons. But most of all, the smell of the forest is like a drug to the dragon. There is a sizable difference between a jungle and a forest in these factors, at least for the green dragon. On top of that, the green dragon mostly eats mammals, and it would rather eat large beasts like moose, deer, and bear than monkeys and tigers. This is why finding a green dragon in tropical jungle environments is very rare. For example, the jungles of Chult. Not to say that there would not be any, but the green dragons that would be found in these biomes are generally the green dragons that did not really have any other choice, probably because stronger green dragons have kicked them out of better forests. The natural magics of the green dragon deserve their own section. Like with all other true dragons, just the very nature of the dragon existing in a location changes that location considerably. Animals start working for the dragon, plants grow spines, the very forest itself hides the dragon and moves at the behest of the creature. These effects typically form around 1 mile surrounding the lair of the green dragon. As powerful as these effects are, they cease to be when the green dragon dies. They are only manifested by the powerful presence and natural magics of the creature. What most people do not know is that even though the forest itself loses its magics, the actual location of the green dragon's grave suffers quite the opposite. The decaying body of a green dragon is the greatest fertilizer seemingly in the magical world. The immediate location of the dragon's grave explodes in plant growth. Lush, beautiful, and deadly plant growth. Grasses, trees, and other vegetation, nearly all of them poisonous, grow swiftly to abnormally large sizes. What is interesting about this is that as the magics of the body of the green dragon seep into the earth, they actually thin the layer between the prime-material realm and the Feywild. So the plants in the affected region around the carcass of the dragon become more and more Fey-touched, which results in even bigger growth for these trees. It would not be uncommon for hags of the forest to have in their possession maintained carcasses of green dragons for the purposes of growing poisonous plants and for the purposes of opening portals to the Feywild. This fact is worth keeping in mind. The scales of a green dragon make for perfect light to medium armor. This is because the scales of a green dragon are not as hard or as thick as the scales of any other true dragon. Instead, they are the most flexible out of their entire kind. So if someone happens to raid a forest hag shack, they might be able to find some of those juicy scales. This is what was meant before about how to tell a green dragon skeleton apart from another type of dragon. Just by looking at the skeleton itself, it might be very hard since there would not be too many differentiating factors in the body to tell them apart. But a sure way to know that the skeleton being observed is indeed a green dragon would be to notice the explosive vegetation that surrounds the skeleton of the creature. Having found that, anyone would be able to tell exactly what they were looking at. Part 5. The Black Dragon, Lord of Acid and Cruelty. The exploration now descends into darkness, into swamps, into the realm of the most purely evil creature among dragonkind, the Black Dragon. General dragon guidelines would work with virtually any true dragon, but dragons are many, and all of them are very distinct. Every dragon has its unique biome it likes to live in, a unique diet it survives on, and a unique style of treasure that it likes to hoard. Black dragons, better known as skull dragons, represent the darkest nature of dragonkind. Black dragons are called skull dragons because of the very interesting shape of their heads. This includes their deep-socketed eyes and their broad nasal opening. This skeletal appearance gets more pronounced as they age. The skin on their cheekbones and the scales on the sides of their heads gets deteriorated as they get older, basically thinning and thinning the layers of skin. This tightens the look of their face and makes it look more skeleton-looking. The older a black dragon gets, the more skeletal it looks. This is crucial for an adventurer to know. In darkness, a person can only see in black and white, provided that they have dark vision. So when color cannot truly be perceived, these differences between dragon species tell a hero exactly what they need to know. That being said, the literal biggest tell that can confirm a dragon is indeed a black dragon are the horns. A black dragon will always have its set of two horns pointing forward, but most of the time, not like a bull, whose horns would point upward. Instead, they point downward. This is literally the most important identifying feature. It would be the singular clue to figuring out if a dragon's skeleton is indeed a black dragon. In fact, this is one of the best ways to tell if a piece of dragon art is from Pathfinder or Dungeons & Dragons. In D&D, black dragon horns will always point forward and down. This can even be seen all the way back in the first edition monster manual. The thing about black dragons is that they are very much attracted to the Shadowfell. Whether that is its magics or its nodes, something about that plane of darkness and despair calls to them. One thing known about dragons and Shadowfell nodes is that when those two combine, the result is typically Shadow Dragon. When a dragon turns into a Shadow Dragon, it can be very tricky to tell exactly what kind of dragon it used to be. Its color changes, its breath weapon changes. It is always camouflaged by this shadowy demeanor. But the straight, forward-facing horns pointing downward should still be easily seen throughout the cover of Shadow. Horns. Most important defining feature of a black dragon. Now that the method to easily tell them apart from other dragons is established, the advice is to run away as soon as possible, if unfortunate enough to actually see one. Not that you would see one coming. They rarely fight head-on. They actually love ambushes, probably more so than any other dragon. But the reason to run is because they are well known to be the most evil out of all of the chromatic dragons. Metallic dragons tend to good. Chromatic dragons tend to evil. But black dragons really do take on their chromatic side almost universally. They kill anything that moves, even when they are not hungry. But when they are hungry, they love to hear their meals beg for mercy before killing them. The idea of people prospering and being generally happy angers the black dragon. It rejoices in the suffering of others. This nature is shown in the particular type of treasure that black dragons love. Each dragon type has very specific preferences for the type of treasure that they covet. Some dragons prefer diamonds over other gems. Other dragons prefer craftsmanship over gold. Others prefer slaves over material wealth. The black dragon is the only dragon, with the possible exception of silver dragons, who literally prefers simple gold pieces over any other type of treasure. If someone wanted to bribe a black dragon, they would have a way better chance at doing so by giving it coins instead of gems. Sometimes, even if the gems would be worth more. This is because skull dragons love collecting relics of empires long gone. The idea that the dragon outlived a kingdom fills it with joy. The old coinage of fallen kingdoms reminds it of that. Honestly, and this might be contrary to popular belief, black dragons do not really care as much about living in the literal remains of castles. Generally speaking, even if those castles are in the swamp, that is not what drives them. The main thing is knowing that the dragon survived, and the people in the castle did not, and that they probably suffered as they died. That is what the dragon really loves. Having the treasures to remind it of that is what really makes it all better. Black dragons would much rather just live in putrid, watery swamps. Whether that would be a cave system or a submerged dungeon, the more putrid the better. The decomposing animals and plant matter is decoration for a dragon. It loves to dig itself into the nasty, dirty mud. Black dragons do not just live in swamps. They can also be seen frequently in forests, though only if those forests have large quantities of nasty water. So jungles would be more their style than a dry forest. Even when black dragons and green dragons might share a large forest, seldom would they fight over territory. Black dragons do not like dry areas of the forest. Green dragons would stay away from the fetid, swampy areas, so they typically keep to themselves and follow the natural barriers. It also helps that their diet is also very different. Where a green dragon might enjoy eating red meat the most, a black dragon mostly eats fish, mollusks, and other aquatic creatures. So fighting over meals is not typically seen. That being said, a black dragon can most certainly eat red meat, and sometimes it is seen actually doing that. But when that happens, interestingly enough, the black dragon literally sort of pickles the meal. For example, if a black dragon were to capture and kill a human, it would leave the human corpse in a fetid pond to rot and decompose before actually eating it. This is just the way the dragon flavors its food. Not just that, but the rotting of the human corpse in the swamp would maintain the area fetid and disgusting and rotting. It would make the place more foul, which is exactly what the dragon wants. Black dragons will do anything within their power to survive, if it is possible. Whether that would be giving part of their treasure in order to live, or even sacrificing their own children if it means survival, they literally do not care. The one way to make a black dragon fight to the death is if the battle would result in the domination of the dragon. For example, if a mage was trying to magically dominate the dragon to make it his mount, or if the dragon knew that getting captured was going to be very likely, then the skull dragon would actually fight to the death. But otherwise, it will do everything it can to run away. That one caveat is that the dragon would rather die than be submitted to a different master. Black dragons, as might be expected at this point, do not share much love for their young. In fact, most of the time, they do not even take measures to protect the locations of the eggs. Thankfully, the eggs are naturally protected, since for the young to actually grow within the egg must be submerged in literal acid. So it is extremely unlikely that the eggs would fall into any real danger from predators. But in the case of egg hunters, for example, the eggs would be found mostly abandoned and forgotten. If anything, other races that are allied to the dragon might be found doing the protecting for it. This brings up something particularly interesting about black dragons, the power that they have over those that reside in their swamps. Specifically, lizards. This is a power that really old black dragons possess that many people actually do not know about. The ability for skull dragons to dominate and control reptiles. There is something about the reptilian brain that these types of dragons appear to have control over. Whether they are critters like tiny lizards, or ferocious giant crocodiles, or even the lizard folk, the sway that an ancient black dragon has over these creatures is like honey to a bee. Easily, they fall into the influence of the dragon like a hypnotic charm. It is more than just being persuasive. It is actual magic that makes a black dragon control these types of reptiles. This makes black dragon lairs particularly dangerous. The dragon has guards that cost it nothing to maintain. Every crocodile in the swamp is a potential sentry. Every lizard folk tribe is a potential army. The dragon accumulates forces without effort, simply by existing long enough to develop the domination ability. Number Part 6. The White Dragon, Primal Hunter of the Ice. The final chromatic dragon represents something entirely different from its four siblings. Not fire, or lightning, or poison, or acid. Cold, pure, primal cold. The White Dragon. White dragons, also called ice dragons or glacial worms, have a reputation as dull, stupid creatures. They are the smallest and weakest of the evil dragons, though even if slow-witted, they are terribly efficient hunters. In fact, they are the best hunters amongst all of dragonkind. And of course, as greedy and evil as the other chromatic dragons. White dragons have a sleek profile, sharp and big at the nose, with a pointed chin. Their face exudes an aura of ferocity and bestial wrath, rather than one of cunning and intellect. Their claws are serrated and meant for ice climbing. Their eyes have multiple membranes, meant to protect them against the sharp brightness of the seas of snow where they lair. Their bodies are mostly white, with scales of pale blue and light gray mixed in to camouflage them in the snow and in the cloudy sky. They are primal and vengeful, They lack the cunning and tactics of most dragons, though they make up for it by their bestial nature. They are singularly focused on surviving and slaughtering their enemies. They only consume food that has been frozen, devouring creatures killed by their breath weapon while they are still stiff and frigid. Some of those frozen by their breath will be regarded as treasures by the dragon if the battle was intense enough. Even though they are only moderately intelligent, they have extraordinary memories. They recall every slight and every defeat, and have been known to conduct malicious vendettas against creatures that have offended them. They are lone wolves. They avoid all other dragons except for other wights of the opposite sex for the purposes of mating. They attack creatures without provocation. They rarely have slaves or servants, because only those who can withstand constant losses by the dragon ever get to serve a white dragon. Creatures like kobolds who constantly sacrifice themselves to the dragon in order to serve it. The only ones who can gain the obedience of a white dragon are those who show great strength in defeating it, who can bend it to their will. Creatures like powerful frost giants who tame them by beating them into submission. White dragons love the cold sparkle of ice and favor treasures that share a similar quality. Treasures like diamonds. That being said, a lot of ivory and bone sculptures are typically found in their lairs, since that is what would be found in the far north. White dragons keep their treasure chests encased in ice. They spread their loose coins all across their cave to form bright, starry layers. Because the white dragon has flawless memory, it remembers how it got every single coin in its lair. They are also notoriously difficult to bribe, since any offer of treasure is seen as an insult to their ability to simply slay the creature making the offer and take the treasure on their own. Everything just covered except for the few details about their physical body, like their serrated claws and their eye membranes, is what the monster manual tells us about white dragon. But as expected, there is also a lot of stuff that the developers of the monster manual did not really have the space to put in. Dungeons & Dragons has released tons of books on dragons, on their behavior, and on their habits. They could not possibly put it all in the monster manual. There just is not enough space. Now for what the monster manual does not include. The biggest thing to understand in order to truly get the white dragon is their animal behavior, but more specifically, why they have this animal behavior. The key is the abilities and disadvantages of their brain. The monster manual says that white dragons have excellent memories, that they remember every slight ever done to them. That much is true. The white dragon has legendary recollection when it comes to events that have transpired. It will remember faces with perfect clarity. It will remember transactions and deals. It will remember locations and conversations. It has the ability to remember where every single coin came from in its hoard, and that is pretty huge. This power of recollection, however, only works for physical interactions that the dragon has done. The white dragon's brain does not really understand much of anything that is an abstract concept, or remember it either. The one exception to this rule are feelings of offense and feelings of vengeance, which the dragon will remember forever. But there are many things that a white dragon's brain will simply just not understand. Things like civility, tradition, math, innovation, creativity, experimentation, education, art, storytelling, humor, how to influence people, how to understand what other people are thinking. A white dragon's brain is, in many ways, advanced, but in many other ways, it is completely stunted. It possesses a complete inability to truly understand abstract concepts. Basically everything that would be considered an abstract idea, the white dragon will just not get. The general intellect of an adult and ancient white dragon is equivalent to that of a human, but a human without any form of study or training. Because a white dragon does not have any form of study or training, hence, for the most part, the intellect of a medieval peasant might be more appropriate for an older white dragon. This is finally why other dragons actually consider the white dragon as the thug of dragon kind. For this one reason, here is an example to illustrate. If a white dragon is flying over a frozen ridge and spots a small group of moose, it might decide to spear down and eat them. In the future, the dragon will remember where the hunt happened. It will remember how many moose it saw and how many it ate, but it will not remember whether it was hungry before eating them or whether 3 moose satisfied its hunger. It will not remember if the hunt was hard or easy or how much physical effort it went through. It will simply remember the hard facts of what was in front of it at the time of the hunt. Literally, just what it saw. Because of its lack of understanding in the abstract field, the dragon would be a terrible storyteller. If it wanted to relay what it saw, it would not be able to understand its own actions or why it took them. Neither would it be able to intuit why its enemies did what they did. It does not experiment. It does not perform any form of creative attack. It just does what it does, because it does it. A truly, purely instinctual creature. The dragon is also a terrible liar and the worst at trying to influence someone else. It just does not understand how other minds work in that way. It would not know what to say in order to get the necessary response it would desire from others. Once this is understood, everything about the white dragon makes sense. Everything that follows from this point has strong roots to this predicament that they possess. As animalistic hunters, white dragons have very little preference when it comes to types of prey. They will honestly eat anything that is presented to them. They will typically go for the most convenient meal worth their hunting efforts. If they spot a farm, they would go for the cattle instead of the farmers. This is not because they think that the farmers might hurt them. It is not because if they kill the farmers, then there will be no more farm in the future. When they eat the cattle, they do not just eat a few to make sure that there are cattle in the future, or to make sure that the farm continues going so that they can then snack later. None of these things are going through the head of the dragon. The cattle are easy prey. Not a lot of effort is required. They have a lot of meat, so the dragon eats them. And that is it. That is all that goes through the dragon's head. For the farmer, they are actually stuck in a truly awful place, because there is not really much that one can do to stop a white dragon from eating your cattle. If offered a strong bribe, or if you perform a strong show of force, that might actually stop the dragon momentarily. But the dragon will always come back. Once again, the dragon does not remember very well most abstract ideas. The concept of, oh, if I don't eat those cattle, then I will get paid, does not really compute well in the white dragon's brain. That is a promise, and the promise is fairly abstract. The idea that a human might get angry if the dragon broke this promise is bizarre in its head. It really has no idea what the human will do when the dragon does something, and most of the time, the dragon just does not care. The monster manual explains that the white dragon will eat its own servants constantly, and that is just the way that the creature is, especially when realizing that the white dragon constantly attacks things that are stronger than it, specifically because the concept of fear and being smart about these things simply does not enter the white dragon's head. So even a strong show of force typically will not keep this dragon away. The white dragon also has no concept of population control. It will kill and devour and eat and slay until there is no more food left in the area, at which point it will simply move to a new zone to hunt. Another example involves mating behavior. White dragons are actually prone to carnal pleasures. They often mate simply for the fun of it. They have no interest in fathering children. Neither do they care about the progression of their species. They find white dragons of the opposite sex, and they mate just for fun. If they end up having children, then so be it. But that is never their intent. In fact, white dragons are the worst parents out of all of true dragonkind. Out of sheer instinct, they will lay their eggs close to their lair, but they will never truly protect those eggs. Their eggs are generally protected merely by the fact that the dragon tends to relax close to them, but they share no particular parental instinct towards them. The dragon might simply regard their eggs as merely just another possession that has to be defended, like one of their simple gold coins. When the babies hatch, the parents will each go their separate ways. Their babies will either go with the father or go with the mother, but the parents will not protect them and they will not care for them. The babies are expected to care for themselves. The white dragon will accept the baby to follow it for the next couple of decades, but typically the baby will be pushed out before it hits maturity, because that is when the young dragon will start to be considered a rival. And when that happens, no concept of family will keep them from killing each other and eating one another. In fact, there are recorded events of a young adult white dragon killing its parents just to take their hoard before the young dragon even made it to maturity. The fact that the white dragon has not gone extinct is actually quite miraculous. White dragons actually do not need to live in Arctic climates. There are many white dragons that live in cold forests and just normal chilly regions. Also, many of them simply live in normal tall mountains. The reason they live in the far north cold climates is because they do prefer it, but not necessarily because they truly have to. The problem with the ones that do not live in Arctic climates is that they just die. White dragons are good hunters. They will always find food when they need to, but they are not intelligent, and their bright white color sells them out in non-Arctic climates. The heat also makes them sluggish and slow, which makes them easier targets. White dragons also have no concept of picking their targets. Many of them will try and attack fortified humanoid settlements and will simply get destroyed. They are also the weakest of all dragons, so any other dragon will kill them if they see them. White dragons survive so well in the far north because, to be frank, no one else wants to be there. There are many recorded cases of white dragon skeletons in non-Arctic climates, but seemingly they all died off. That is why they just are not found there anymore. In fact, the only reason why white dragons do not run out of food nowadays is because they have evolved to hibernate for as long as they are active. So if a white dragon is active for 5 years, it will then hibernate for another 5 years. Some of the older white dragons can be active for as long as 20 years, but then of course will go hibernate for 20 years as well. They have evolved to have such a long hibernation process to allow for nature to replenish itself after the gorging of the dragon during its active times. Otherwise, this creature would be long extinct. They would have just run out of food a long time ago. They also have evolved to produce many eggs when they do happen to father children, though only about a third of the babies ever survive because of the terrible parenting of the white dragon. White dragons are particularly resistant to blindness that comes from bright lights. This is because of the extra layers of membranes that reside in their eyes. Because of the location where the dragon lairs, which is the snowy biome, many creatures in this type of biome suffer what is called snow blindness. The snow reflects a large amount of UV rays back up right into the eyes of creatures walking on the snow. This can cause burning of the cornea and subsequent painful momentary blindness. White dragons are immune to this. They evolved to have these membranes because of this environment, which is actually the reason why they love so much shiny and glittering objects inside of their lairs, because they are completely immune to this form of effect. In fact, they do not only like shiny objects as treasures, they also prefer glass and anything that shines and bounces off light, like polished silver or polished mirrors. In fact, anything that has mirrors, they actually love. Also, the reason why they freeze their treasures in layers upon layers of transparent ice inside of their lair is not only to protect the treasure, but to magnify it. The coatings of ice actually magnify the size of the treasure, making it look bigger, which is the reason why they do it. Lastly, white dragons hate talking. It will take a lot of convincing to make a white dragon actually speak. All they want to do is hunt, eat, and collect treasure. Any form of energy that they spend not doing those things is a serious waste of time in their eyes. But if someone does manage to get one talking, it is important to know how difficult it is for a white dragon to be bribed. The trick is to hope that the white dragon is old enough to understand the idea of a promise, and to promise it more meat and more treasure than what is currently being carried. If allowed to live, of course. There is a huge gamble there, but it is the best anyone has got. It is recorded as typically the only way to make any form of deal with a white dragon. Never offer a white dragon anything that you are wearing or anything that you are carrying. Offer something that you will bring to it in the future. Of course, try not to offend it by not actually giving it the treasure, because as is well known, any slight done to a white dragon, they will never forget. Number Part 7, Tiamat and the Eternal Conflict. The Chronicle of the Chromatic Dragons concludes where it must, with their queen, Tiamat, the five-headed dragon, the goddess of chromatic dragon kind, the dark mother who claims creation of every red, blue, green, black, and white dragon in existence. Each of Tiamat's 5 heads represents one chromatic dragon color. The red head breathes fire and schemes for dominance. The blue head breathes lightning and calculates with cold precision. The green head breathes poison and whispers lies. The black head breathes acid and revels in cruelty. The white head breathes cold and strikes with primal fury. Each head possesses its own personality. Each head has its own agenda. Each head would be a formidable dragon entity in its own right. Together, unified in a single body, guided by a single will, they comprise the most dangerous being in the chromatic dragon pantheon. Tiamat is a goddess. In most cosmologies, she is imprisoned in Avernus, the first layer of the 9 hells. This imprisonment limits her direct action in the material plane, but does not limit her influence. Her cults spread across the multiverse. Worshippers in every major setting perform rituals in her name. They sacrifice treasures to her. They sacrifice lives to her. They work to weaken the barriers that hold her in Avernus, hoping to free her for a return to the mortal worlds. Her chromatic children carry her influence whether they acknowledge her or not. Every red dragon that hoards gold serves her purpose. Every blue dragon that establishes hierarchy reflects her nature. Every green dragon that lies embodies her essence. Every black dragon that inflicts cruelty pleases her. Every white dragon that hunts continues her legacy. The eternal conflict between Tiamat and Bahamut shapes dragon society throughout existence. This is not mere rivalry. This is cosmic war, fought through proxies and champions, through chromatic and metallic dragons meeting in battle across countless worlds, through the choices of every dragon that has ever lived. Bahamut represents justice and nobility, protection and wisdom. Tiamat represents tyranny and greed, destruction and domination. Neither can defeat the other permanently. Neither will stop trying. Chromatic dragons do not uniformly worship Tiamat. Red dragons often follow their own creation mythology centered on Askarath. Other chromatic dragons acknowledge Tiamat's power without necessarily devoting themselves to her worship. The relationship is complicated by dragon pride. Submitting to any authority, even divine authority, sits poorly with creatures who consider themselves the apex of existence. But all chromatic dragons acknowledge Tiamat's power. All know that she watches. All understand that she can influence their fates in ways they cannot prevent. The relationship between Tiamat and her chromatic children is not parental in any nurturing sense. She is a goddess of tyranny and destruction. Her children serve her purposes or they do not, and she cares about them only insofar as they advance her goals. Love, as other creatures understand love, does not enter the equation. Yet she is undeniably their queen. The 5 chromatic species are her legacy. Their diversity, their power, their ecological dominance across countless worlds all reflect her influence. Without Tiamat, chromatic dragons would not exist. Or so she claims. The truth of dragon origins remains debated among sages. What cannot be debated is Tiamat's current power and her ongoing threat to the multiverse. Number conclusion. The nature of chromatic evil. The chromatic dragons, in their 5 terrible varieties, represent something fundamental about the nature of evil in Dungeons and Dragons. Red dragons show that pride and wrath can be intelligent. that arrogance can coexist with strategic thinking, that the most destructive creatures can also be the most prepared. They define their world through fire and force, measuring themselves against each other in an endless competition for status. They are tyrants who genuinely believe they deserve to rule. Blue dragons show that evil can be civilized, that cruelty can coexist with social sophistication, that the capacity for love and loyalty does not preclude the capacity for oppression and destruction. They form communities. They raise their children with care. They maintain hierarchies and settle disputes through law rather than violence. And they are still fundamentally monsters who terrorize and kill without remorse. Green dragons show that treachery can wear a pleasant face. That manipulation requires understanding what others want. That the most dangerous liars are those who understand truth well enough to subvert it. They speak smoothly and think constantly of schemes within schemes. They play games with the lives of others for their own amusement. Black dragons show that cruelty needs no justification, that some creatures simply enjoy suffering, that evil can be pure and simple without complex motivation. They kill because killing pleases them. They torture because torture amuses them. They represent malevolence without pretense or apology. White dragons show that destruction needs no thought, that primal violence can be as dangerous as calculated malice, that intelligence is not required for effectiveness. They hunt, they kill. They remember every wrong, and they cannot be reasoned with because reason is beyond their understanding. Together, these 5 species cover the spectrum of malevolence. Together, they have terrorized adventurers for 50 years of game history. Together, they continue to represent the ultimate challenge for heroes who would stand against darkness. Understanding the chromatic dragons requires more than knowing their breath weapons and challenge ratings. It requires understanding their societies, their parenting, their territorial behaviors, their weaknesses, and their unexpected strengths. A dragon is never just a monster. A dragon is a civilization of one, with culture and history and psychology. The chromatic dragons embody evil, but they embody it in 5 distinct and fascinating ways. The flame of the red, scorching all who dare approach. The lightning of the blue, striking with patient precision. The poison of the green, corrupting everything it touches. The acid of the black, dissolving hope and flesh alike. The cold of the white, freezing the world into stillness. 5 colors, 5 elements, 5 civilizations of destruction. These are chromatic dragons of Dungeons and Dragons.